You people don't like cow roots when they're super enigmatic, do you? Are you ready? All right. If life had a human name, it would be, without any doubt, trust me, it would be life, L, life. L standing for, you guessed it. But leave us reverse some of the mapping we've been doing and consider a different approach. Instead of regarding growth, a process, as simply an aspect of life, a characteristic of life, let's consider for a moment life as being an actual entity unto itself. I mean growth, not it being some process of life, but that growth itself, growth in the processional sense, growth as a verb. Let's consider right quick for a moment that it could be its own thing, its own entity. Now, if it was, I'm going to tell you what growth's name would be. Consider growth instead of an aspect of life. Consider it like a kid. For a second. The kid of life. But its name would be growth, life. Yeah, I know. All right, I'm going to tell you. The O in its name would stand for organization. On more than several occasions when we have been intellectually gnashing about, we have mentioned the fact that it is necessary for the secondary world of man to grow in a fashion that is stable, orderly, and predictable. All that being the case, it could be wrapped up verbally in a more complex way, which to those who can see it, of course, is more simplistic rather than having to say orderly, stable. I could throw in others I have. Predictable. Other than that, you could say all of that would fall within the reality behind the word organization. All aspects of man's secondary world. This is not all that far removed, to start with, to realize that in the primary world, what ordinary people just think of as the natural world, plants and animals, organization is the byword, all the way from cellular biology. Just consider what ordinary intelligence refers to as the natural world, everything outside of man on this planet. A little more specifically would be what we refer to as the primary world, but one contains the other. You figure out which. Organization is the natural world. Everybody would know that. You're a high school science teacher that was just teaching you high school science during his off moments from the football team and teaching shop. Even he knew that. I mean, he had read it and memorized it, but even he would say that. You could almost pass 10th grade biology, I'm sure, if not personal relations. Some of the coaches used to teach that. That's before they would say the S word out in public, back in the dark ages of the 50s. But they would say organization. You're going to start studying. They give you a little microscope. They give you all sorts of charts having to do with sweet peas and monks and friars. But the key word would be organization. So I assume all of you can recall that. But on an equal, though overlooked, or even when it's apparently not absolutely overlooked, it is misread, and that's not a dissimilar fashion, since the secondary world is a natural growth from the primary world, that man The I is a natural growth in my old equation of the not I. Growing out of that, you might then expect that I'm about to point out that even though it is not seen as such, there is in the secondary world the same kind of strict, absolute requirement for organization. And to, as always, in a quick way, to start out, we can divide up the secondary world of man right quick and say that with this organization, I was going to try and hit a few major examples, that there has to be organization in man's secondary world, and then the subdivision, consider the organization that is absolutely required in man's intellect, man's feelings, and in man's actions. Or a little more not I examples perhaps, man's science, man's art, man's social affairs. There is absolutely as much a requirement for organization as there is in the fact that a leaf, an amoeba, has got to be organized in such a way that it will survive, that it can take in energy, it can process energy, and it can expel the energy that it can no longer use. Leaves must do it, beavers must do it, even prime ministers must do it. They say even Cole Porter did it. It is not seen as being any particular, significance, although, if you want me to speak for your own old intelligence, it might say, well, I have read something in a textbook on sociology, or I saw some comment, or there's books, I'm sure there are, on the organizations of humanity. But it is seen as being in the same way as a reflection of man's institutions, which ordinary intellect sees as being an outgrowth, an invention of man itself, as being separate from man. And if you recall, all of you held me down and made me finally see the light, I think earlier this year, that there is no such thing as institutions outside of man. That we have Harvard campus, but there is no Harvard outside the people that make up Harvard. The Catholic Church, I understand, owns several pieces of property now throughout the world. That is not the church. If you take the people out, you've got nothing. No, you got buildings, but you surely understand, or I now understand that you pointed it out, there is no church left. So just don't think that I'm about to try and point out the obvious to you. It is not recognized, in the way I'm trying to get you to see it in a second, that there is a kind of strict, absolutely orderly need for organization that is not incomparable to that which is required for ordinary existence of trees, plants, and animals, and man at the non-psychic level. Now, for organization to move in a most expeditious way requires organizations. And here we have absolutely left the comparable discussion or picture of the natural world of plants and animals being alive, functioning, based upon, cannot escape organization that just go from a cellular level in any kind of side direction that you care to picture it. But that's the basis that will cover the natural world. That will cover everything about man up to here, as far as the world is concerned, as far as world intelligence is concerned. But when you get into organizations, there is now nothing comparable. The packs of animals, those that are pack-oriented, are not organizations. Different plants that seem to collect even in the wilds together, that you find a whole bunch of marigolds, all thriving together. That is not organizations. That is organization. It is silent, it is primary, but it is not organizations. Now, organizations, to put it very simply, assist man apparently in the ways of him organizing his thoughts, which you would see most easily in the apparent outside world, through schooling and science. The organizations apparently assist man in organizing his feelings, his human feelings, not primary passion, but his human feelings, and then it could be seen primarily through religion and art. Art in the full sense of the word. And thirdly, organizations appear to assist man to organize his actions. And in the area of his actions, it is always that ordinary intelligence, ordinary men are always looking to these external institutions for restraint, for direction, and for control. It's another aspect, if you recall, that we have mentioned of how, to ordinary intellect, quotes other people's ideas, especially if they're quotable, especially if they have been remembered and thought by other people so long, or however ordinary intelligence would care to phrase it. The idea of people quoting that you expect the premier thinker in a contemporary city, the man who just received the Nobel Prize for being smart, if there was such a category. There's no doubt, in his speech, he's going to do what? Quote other smart people. Man's action, ordinary man, we don't have to keep looking out here and me having to point in you. It is the organizations outside of man that ordinary intelligence takes as being something absolutely separate from humanity, such as Harvard and the church. It is the looking to, overall, to organizations that apparently are out here to guide him, to restrict him, to control him. But notice, on a wide level, all three of these, that is, the organizations apparently being there to assist man to organize his thoughts, to organize his feelings, and to organize his actions. All of them require, on the general level, they require organization. You could not say with any operational validity, you could not say that each person requires at least one other person to help him or her organize thoughts, feelings, and actions. The world would not be growing secondarily if we only had two people, for all sorts of reasons. But for one of the reasons, there would be no organization outside the one guy. There would only be one other person. Now, the difference, since I am looking upon a cornucopia of blank faces, what I'm saying, although ordinary intelligence would say that one person has close friends, advisors, family. And there's no doubt that sometime in your life you went to your father and said, "Hey, Dad, what do you think I ought to do about this? Do you buy the plain ones or the ones with ribs on them?" I mean, some important information. Or you may ask somebody, you may go and request information from an official source in the city. Or you may go, if you want to push it, and I'll take care of this, you might go to consult with a rabbi or a priest. And you might think, well, there's individuals in my life that have some importance to me. Your father is part of an institution. Your mother, a priest, a rabbi. But even if you tried to separate them, if you just said, all right, I've got an old friend, a guy that I met years ago where I grew up with, and I'd go and ask his advice. I have for many, many years. I go there and he tells me, I'll give him a problem in my life, a situation. He'll tell me what to do. There are people like that. But please note this. Those people constitute not even 1% of humanity. You ought to know that. They just do not. And some of you may not even know anybody like that. Your imagination at first might have told you, well, yeah, you might have even been thinking that you were that kind of guy. But you ain't. You weren't. There is not a kind of one-on-one apparent help, assistance with ordinary people to organize themselves. Do you hear it? You need to see that to press on. Now you may think, well, there's one priest I like. I'm a Catholic or I'm a Protestant, and there's one minister. He's head of my church. I go to see him. And so there is an individual in my life that's important. No. He would not be there were it not for the Catholic Church, were it not for the Presbyterian Church, whatever it was. Or you can say, well, there's no philosophy professor. And I go back and I talk to him. I don't go just to the philosophy department back to my alma mater and say, hey, somebody give me some advice. I need some philosophical advice. I wouldn't stick around unless, Dr. So-and-so was still alive and still there. But you do understand, Dr. So-and-so would not be there. You would not be there. This whole scene would not be there were it not for the organization that seemed to produce the university. I just want you to see there is no such thing on any meaningful scale. It's just any example. If you absolutely knew somebody that was a hermit, more or less, and the only advice he ever took, he didn't take a newspaper, he doesn't have a radio, he's not religious, and every now and then when he's really in an intellectual cul-de-sac, he will go see this one guy, and that's all. Just understand that is not the operational definition of life. People do not do that. And the few that do, they're as rare as hermits. And I don't mean rare in any sort of decorous sense. That is not the nature of life. The secondary world of man does not grow in such a fashion. The organizations are that which, whether you identified it that way or not, it is organizations that apparently give man the ability, an individual man, the ability, apparently, to organize his thoughts, to organize his feelings in some way, and then to organize his actions. But it comes from organizations. It does not come from another individual. Notwithstanding the fact that organizations cannot be separated from humanity, understand. But not from another individual. It is from organizations. How would an individual man consider him as his own little organization? Here. How would he organize his thoughts? And this you have really got to play a kind of subversive make-believe right quick. It won't help to dwell on it, but to try and picture what would it have been, which is extremely difficult to do, if you had had no schooling at all. How would you organize your thoughts? Or, maybe a little easier, look out at life itself right quick. How would life, the modern day, in our time and place right now, the Western world, 1990, how would this be going on? How would we be having television? How would we be filming this, taping this? How would we be here with electric lights? Were it not for science, in the full sense, technology, but in science. It is the wider sense, it is like the institutional organization of human thought. How would you, to play a little further right quick, how would you have ever organized, do you think, can you imagine right quick, how would you, speaking for humanity, ever organize your feelings had there been no outside organizations, religions, and the full context of that, all senses of morality, philosophies that seem to have to do with the question of good and evil, how men should treat one another, how society should grow. How would a child growing up with no organizational assistance, influence, how would you think that they would have ever organized your feelings? I repeat one more time, there is no real specific point to this. for me saying for you to do it, because you can't really do it. It's just to try to get you to get a glimpse that it's unanswerable, which should give you some sort of clue right there that if you had grown up, if humanity, or an individual human or some group of humans had grown up with no organizational influence on their feelings, what would you make of them? What would they be like now? And all you can do is kind of glance and then look off. Don't come up with an answer. There is none. All aspects of education, schooling, science, all aspects of religions of all natures, humanistic philosophies, all forms of art, literature, music, everything that seems to be outside the strict realm of the intellect. All of that springs ultimately into secondary level, springs ultimately from organization. It does not spring from another person. This is not absolutely true, and it has a big impact on history, but that's not what I'm talking about tonight. So, for those of you that can look around corners sometime. The stable, orderly, everyday, historic evolution and growth of the singular world of man does not come about through great fits and starts. And it does not come about through this kind of one-on-one passing of some kind of information or some kind of uplifting ideas. It comes about through organization. Humanity's thoughts must be organized. Speaking of humanity as being one whole system, humanity's feelings must be organized. Humanity's actions must be organized. And, don't say of course, and of course, you might see that there are aspects inside of the body of our old buddy LL Life that stand up and rail throughout history against this organization, sometimes known as the Young Turks, the beatniks, the outsiders, the rebels. And now we're somewhere that some of you can say, yeah, I was that kind of guy. That you are wired up, little pieces here and there. Not that there's anything intrinsically preferable or beneficial in being an isolated rebel over somewhere. But there is this kind of ordinarily referred to rebellion going on, attempted rebellion, in the world of academia, in the world of art. And there are people saying that the organization, as we now are faced with 20th century literature, or as we now see the world of plastic arts, as we now see the performing arts, as we now see where science, where sociology is going, it is too strict. I personally, in my great insight, I see that the boundaries have been marked too distinctly, and such intellectual, artistic lemming is holding back progress. That is simply a part of the slinky going up and down the steps. That is part of life, like that little figure that you put on an incline, and will walk is the back and forth. And what is now a sense of rebellion can tomorrow, of course, as everyone knows, be tomorrow's conservative right-wing stickos in the mud. You know, a Castro is lean and mean, a fighting machine, and he gets in power, and he puts on 50 pounds, and can hardly stay awake. That's the way it goes. Individually, which is of no, I don't give anybody the blues, but we'll just say this. Metaphorically, that's it. The individual being of no great consequence in the way life moves. Any of you of a strictly religious nature, there might be seeing this. Get out. What the hell are you doing? Oh, I mean, no offense is what I meant to say. See, I just washed my lips and I can't do a thing like that. An individual, which of course should be your only interest, and your primary, if not all your interest, should be you know who. You. But with ordinary people, it's of no great consequence, individual. Don't, of course, spread that around and don't take it personally, because if you feel like you should take it personally, consider it a canard, an unsubstantiated brute. And I don't mean the kind of people that sing YMCA or Macho Man. It's a French word, not a Greenwich Village word. At any rate, an individual, how would you organize, how would you be able to grow individually, were it not for the organization of your thoughts? How would you be, just at the ordinary level, how would you be an identifiable, sane, that is, at least they haven't locked you up yet, personality, if you did not have an order, an organization to your thoughts? Now, we're not talking about what your IQ is or whether you have self-directed complaints that you are not smart enough. There is an organization to your thought. No matter what it is, there's an organization to it if you're out walking free, more or less making a living, and people do not shun you on the street. There is an organization to your feelings, or again, you would probably, very likely, not be a free person. If you would not be in jail, you would probably be in a place where you don't have to worry about shoestrings or shaving yourself. There has to be an organization, and again, it does not matter if you individually say, well, I'm very depressed, I have a bad self-image. I heard a good one. It's not sexist because I was going to turn in fact, I will. I'll make it a car route. Never mind. Well, it should go beyond. I'll make it a car route sometime. Now, I'll tell you, I won't give you the punchline of what car route was going to do. But the setup was, this pops up all the time, but it just came up again on the news, that in some extensive survey with the women of America, those surveyed, 91% said they were dissatisfied with the way they looked. So, sometime you least expect it, it'll be in a car route, but it'll slip up. It won't be exactly that, but it's the same basis. That's where, if there was no organization of feeling with an individual, they would be coming apart. And that does not, as I started to say, notwithstanding the fact that there are people who say, well, my emotions do bug me. I am not a happy person. Yeah. But if you're out free, you got some kind of relationship, your parents don't absolutely shun you, and you can get, even if it's 12 different relationships a year, at least people of the opposite sex will not run from you in a bar. You're just minimally speaking, you're at least ordinary. Then you have an organization of your feelings. Behavior, of course, you can look at in a certain way as being a reflection of how you think and how you feel. You could think that, but you'd be wrong. I just thought I'd throw it in to see if all of you were still awake and listening. I like to see people take notes and realize, oh, I shouldn't even start that sentence. How would you organize your behavior? For this third example, I'll repeat again, to ask you to engage in a certain kind of neural make-believe, subversively speaking. There is nothing to actually see. There's nothing you're going to look at and go, aha. And if you do, you saw a conclusion and you saw outside of what we're talking about, you're no longer thinking. But the question I was going to put to you again rhetorically right quick, that if I say that you would not know how to control your actions, you would not know how to act beyond thinking and feeling, were it not that you had some organization about it. And to ask you, what would it be if an individual, not all of humanity now, but if an individual had no organization with their actions? And it's not just a reflection of thinking and feeling. But how would you know how to act? How would you know how to gesture? Which a lot of it comes from the primary original, but now it's getting out to the area that it's becoming secondary. How would you know what kind of facial gestures, which again come from the primary? But how would you know who to move away from? How would you know how close to stand to somebody that was getting interested in you sexually? How would you know how close to stand or to be with somebody that you were engaged in an intellectual conversation? How would you know whether to turn on somebody, not just at the primary level of fist fight or run, but if somebody began to be offensive, if someone apparently was trying to insult you? How would you know how to act if there were no organization? in a way not dissimilar to what we were mentioning about the intellect and feelings. If you do not have an organization to your feeling, to your actions, may I suggest that you would not be long freely walking in the streets. You do not think about it in this way, the ordinary intellect, but the organization makes, at the everyday level, it makes an individual stable, orderly, and predictable, which is the same kind of requirements that we start out noting are necessary for the expansion of the secondary world of man. Not just the individual, but of man. It is the same requirements. Still overlooked, still misread from this kind of view. And I say misread not because they're making a mistake, but less than fully read. The scanner of the ordinary intellect only sees 3 and 4 parts of more dimensions. But it misreads and it attributes it to individual psychological problems in the individual case, or mass thinking, the knowledge of humanity, would attribute it on larger levels to sociological problems. That a whole group of people over here are having problems because of, in the sociological explanations, of course, are simply institutional, organized versions of a psychological explanation about why this guy is a drunk, why this guy hates women. Then to pick out some group and to give a sociological, and there is no difference. It's just they teach sociology in this room and down the hall. It's psychology. Plus, I understand it's still easier to make a living as a psychologist than a sociologist. If you did not have a sense of organization the way you act, my question I was going to give you again right quick just to glance at, how would you know what to do next? In any case, not just gestures and not just who to run from or how close to stand, but how would you know what to do next? Now, if you want to look real quick, we can play this again right shortly. That if we're going to do this then and say arbitrarily, artificially, strip off the secondary world of you from the primary world, then you, of course, you would know how to operate primarily. You wouldn't have to talk. You wouldn't have to think about it. You would get up and move. If you had to relieve yourself, if you had to go look for food, just go look for food. And there's no question a dog does not have to think, where will I sit next? Regardless of the fact that none of you still know how they turn around 3 times. You're imagining things if you think that your dog turns around once and looks off and thinks, was that 1 or 2? There is no thinking organization to that kind of primary action. But getting away from that artificial, impossible to experience in the 3D world division, then you're down now to your movements. Even though your movements now be that you get up and go to a restaurant because you are hungry, which is the primary level. But how would you know now, just speaking ordinarily at the secondary, educated, sophisticated, civilized level, that let's say that you're living alone or your mate's not there, whoever looks after you, your mama, if you're a man, and you get up and hunger and you realize you got to go somewhere. How would you know whether to get in the car and drive to McDonald's or drive down to Eat Your Vegetables restaurant or drive over to a friend's house and see if they're home and if they're about supper time? Dinner time up north. How would you know? Which, of course, is the same kind of dirty question of saying, what are you going to say next? Now, I don't think about that anymore. I know you don't. What are you going to do next? Well, I don't know. I'll have to think about it. Ha ha. Too fast for you? How would you know? How would you know what to do next? Your actions. Not your thoughts or feelings. We're dividing again. Just how would you know? You're just standing around. Or if I stop a minute and we start fooling with the thing and there you sit. How do you know what to do next? Well, here. Don't say that it's some sort of nervous energy. Don't say that, well, this is part of the subconscious. It is organized. The way in which you move, the way in which you sit, your kind of gestures. You should know this by now. There are people all around you that do not have to be brainstormers. You're sitting here now, people outside of sitting here now. Your aunt that you only see twice a year from Fargo could be driving down the street in Wichita, and let's say that you were there for whatever reason I don't want to go into, and she just sees you from the rear, just for maybe 10 or 15 seconds, you just see sort of a three-quarter shot or at the rear, and she sees something of you, like you're talking to somebody doing something, and she turns to her husband, and she says, Albert, I think that was so-and-so. It's organization. That is the only way that your actions fit in to the orderly, stable, organized growth of the secondary world. Would you take particular note of the fact that organizations are the earthly secondary source, no matter what the old-timers of your forefathers thought, but they are the homebred, hometown, earthly source of all the thing processes, such as nationalistic boundaries, religious factions, social distinctions. Organizations, in a sense, are the plus sign in our old equation of I plus not I equals the whole shooting match. I plus I equals everything. This, in a sense, operationally, is organization and organizations, the efficient mode, the delivery service of organization on this planet, organizations, sometimes known as institutions. They are the organizations. Not, although I'll repeat one more time, it is, of course, all springing from the primary, but the nationalistic boundaries are not just anymore the matter of a wildebeest here and there walking over and lifting its legs and marking off a territory, and zebras over there doing whatever they do, and cats rubbing up against you and you thinking they like you. They're just marking you off. It's just, be glad you got a cat at home instead of a wildebeest, or you'd... because they can run your new shoes. At any rate, you can always say, but don't get stuck there, because that's not the point. You're supposed to be way beyond metaphors. Strip it away from metaphors, on down. So you can say, well, marking off territory has a primary basis. Yes. You know, hell, who told you that? Or figure it out for yourself, it doesn't matter. But get beyond that. Now beyond that, into the secondary world, as much as we can talk about it, and we can talk about it any way we want to, it is not simply marking off territory anymore. It's not. And I did that a little bit because I am sure that right now there's somebody with credentials, degrees, a suit and tie on, and a good haircut, teaching the fact that, well, things have not changed that drastically, students, audience. The kinds of conflicts going on right now between the Iraqis and Turkish Kurds that may be flocking over the border, them fighting over possible secession, them owning their own property. This is not what it appears to be. This is not simply a conflict between those of an absolute fundamentalist Islamic leaning and those who have been tainted, at least, with a more liberal, even approaching Christian views from the Turkish north. No, we're back to the same old thing. It's the same old stuff, I'm telling you. It's just the old animal instincts of people fighting over the limits of their territory. I know that. There are people saying that, and at times it comes and goes. There's nothing new. And it's not incorrect. But it does not explain anything. Because it is no longer, and it's never been. The first person who ever said that was too late. I mean, if some Greek said, wait a minute, we're not fighting. I know that we're about to get in an argument, maybe even fisticuffs with the Spartans, which was a bad mistake to start with. Those of you that's ever been in a long car trip with a Spartan. There was some Greek philosopher somewhere, 5,500 years ago, who said, wait a minute, we're not fighting them because they call themselves Spartans and they live north of us and they got a better harbor or that they got a different religion. You know what it is? We're not much better. Now you can just see this good old Greek philosopher. Look around, he said, we're not much better than, well, look over here. Those wild dogs attacking one another. Look at them chasing one another. They're fighting over the territory. See, the one that just chased someone off, and now he's marking off his territory in that way that dogs are wont to do. My friends, we are not that far removed. We're not fighting the Spartans over some religious. It's no more than that. Somebody, I assure you, said that. Let's say that was one of the first times that one guy addressed another group. The beginning of the secondary world on this planet. The guy was too late. As soon as he said it was too late, because that is no longer, once he could talk, anybody, the secondary world was going, and that is not the solution. That is not the answer. That is no explanation. One more time, I repeat, it's where it came from, if you want to look at it that way. It's the roots of the tree, but to look up now at the kind of leaves on the tree, ordinary intellect cannot look at the leaves of a tree and say, well, I can tell you what the roots look like. Now, I know out in the city that they say they can do that. I'm telling you now we're going to have to, I hate to say it, consider that I'm not speaking literally. The human intellect cannot do that. So it is no longer a matter, although it was true, although it's not incorrect, to say that people fight over national boundaries, over space to enlarge their cities, over grazing land. They are not fighting over territory anymore. The impetus is the growth of the secondary world, and the impetus comes from the secondary world. It comes from the organizations. They are the ones, not that it's their fault, remember, because there are no such things as organizations without people, without humanity. And there is no humanity without our good friend, LL Life, and so there you are. So, end of that subject. You understand? In other words, the door of the closet is still closed in case you were trying to crawl through the keyhole. The organizations, and back to the thing process. Remember that we were talking about a process and we turned it into a thing tonight, calling growth a thing rather than a process. So we could name it growth O life. The organization of humanity, the necessary, absolutely inescapable ingredient for stable, orderly growth, must set up what appears to be these kinds of divisions. And if it was not, the Azerbaijanis and who is it they're wrestling with? Damn right. If they were not fighting over, wait a minute, this used to be an old property line before World War II, and they decided, hey, this is Jordan and this is Iraq and this is, hey, I don't believe that, this was our property. If it wasn't that, what would it be? It's not a cynical attack of humanity at all. If it wasn't that, what would they be doing? Wouldn't they be saying, wait a minute, I just realized, let's assume that suddenly the boundary question is moot. It might take a few days. Then they'd realize something was wrong. That is, life would realize something was wrong down in its middle name. One of its middle names. Suddenly one group would realize, wait a minute. Oh, yeah, I know, we're not fighting over the border. But I just realized, we're the X religion, they're the Y religion. The world ain't big enough for both of us. If it wasn't that, it would be what? Nowadays, it's, I guess at the mechanical, ordinary level, it might be more of cultural clashes. That, well, I'm too sophisticated to actually say that I'm going to kill or that I'll encourage war on my tribe, on these other people. We can work this out. Send this dispute up to the World Court up in The Hague where they got the good dope. In case you don't know, that's why they have World Court up there. Never mind. A sophisticated person say, well, I'm not going to fight over there, and God knows I'm not about to, pardon the figure of speech, I'm not about to get an argument with my neighbor over religion because I'm not even religious. And I don't care if I was. Live and let live. I see all religions as being, I don't know, human manifestations of essentially the same unrecognized cosmic truth. So I'm not going to fight over that. So the more sophisticated, imagine a Frenchman, a humanist, an agnostic, a man with mucho degrees and, as always, a good haircut and a fine mustache. He would not get in an argument with even a German. Now, let's really push it. Over, where were the old boundaries? Over, between Catholicism and Protestantism. Luther's gone, let's forget it. That's Martin Luther, not Luther Allison, because he's still alive and playing. But what would he be inclined to get his Gaelic ruffles ruffled over? Now, think about it. I picked a good one, didn't I? The French, and one of their organizations, the French Academy, they have been passing laws and great discussions over the very thing that would seem to be even a higher level. Cultural conflicts. They have passed laws in France limiting the amount of television coming from America. They have passed laws and have even greater discussions and fistfights with these sophisticated people with the good haircuts and the suits over the incursion of foreign terms. There was serious discussion in their parliament about outlawing, in fact they did replace some of terms that they had no word for, foreign terms that came in, like I think fast food was one they were arguing about, that they had nothing like it, so they just adopted it from America. And there were people staying up there. We're talking about people with PhDs, people in the government saying, nah, here's what we'll call it. It appears to be cultural conflicts. They could say, well, this is if they were listening to all this, they could say, well, we are much more sophisticated. At least we don't fall into the crude kind of examples that somebody like you with a bad haircut and no suit comes up with. At least we're not fighting over territory. I'm not fighting over religion. And I'm not, of course, I don't plan to get in a fist fight again, unless they attack me first, over these matters. But we're talking about something serious now. And they're talking about and if I say, well, you're sort of talking about cultural conflict. You've let in too many foreign workers, and now you go down the street and you can't find, it doesn't have the same Parisian flavor. Some of you live in Paris. If you don't, then of course you got a problem wandering around Marseille, wondering, why Paris? What happened to the good old Paris? Sir, you're in the wrong city. So assuming that you're in Paris, it would be like a cultural conflict. But do you understand? The point is, the ordinary world cannot grow without organization, the secondary world. An organization cannot exist without distinction, without divisions. What are organizations? Go back right quick to the primary world. The cellular organization of a leaf, of a small animal. What is the organization? Cellularly speaking, it is the divisions, other than an amoeba, which is, don't worry about it. There must be distinction. The cellular walls in a leaf is its own version of I plus not I equals everything. That is, from any particular cell. The division, the cellular wall between this cell and that cell, is the plus between I plus not I equals everything. And to it, let us say, if it had that kind of, or any kind of resembling human consciousness, to that one leaf, the leaf itself, if it could see it or had any concept of it, the leaf would equal everything in the old equation. And each cell would think, me, I, plus all the not me's here in this leaf. That is, all the others outside my cellular wall on the other side of this division. My cell plus all the other cells, which are not my cells, equal everything. Organization, operationally. Go back to our good old operational synonym. I trust all of you are getting some feel for that, because there's a purpose for it, me bringing it up. Organization and distinction are operationally synonymous. And yet, look, the very thing that life has the secondary world of man thinking about is that what we should be doing is trying to eradicate distinctions. Such as, well, look, if we would get down to the fact that there were no great distinctions, forget that here's a line that some convention in the 1919s, maybe it's a holdover that World War II didn't catch up with this one, and they're saying, well, here's division just artificially drawn between us, the Serbs, and the Croatians over here. That's ridiculous. We all live on one word, world, this great one community. We got to do away with that. They've been saying that. It's nothing new. That did not come about through you people's generation or Buckminster Fuller or anybody else. And they say we can no longer fight over religion. There's not that much difference. I know there seems to be down at the crude level, but the more sophisticated people now, no, there's not that great deal of a difference. There's none to kill each other over, and the idea between the apparent conflict between Catholicism and Protestantism. We just got to stop it. Nothing new. Just the names of the players, the names of the organizations change throughout history. But there is already wired into man this cry that we should be trying to eradicate the distinctions. Does nobody, again, before I say it, understand, recognize, at least pay silent lip regard service to the astounding efficiency of life that is making people, is making a cell saying, hey, this leaf, that is my universe, the world, this leaf would be heaven on a tree if I could only break down the divisions between me and all the other cells. Well, it can be done. All you got to do is pick up the leaf, do it for them, and run your thumbnail down it. You do understand that you can come back in 24 hours and the leaf has turned a very unhealthy color. If you break down the walls, the leaf does not get better, but it's the same thing. You can look at another quick one. Another aspect I was going to point out, that the secondary world of man, the world of the intellect, could not exist, it could not grow without organization. And organizations could not exist or function without laws, without rules, without restrictions. They must be stated, they must be standard. In the natural world, you understand, leaves, I know there can be an anomaly going on somewhere, but you look out at a tree, and I don't know how many leaves, 20,000 on a tree, they're operating by standard, predictable laws, regulations. No organization, even the government. A church, any organization cannot function. If you want to say again another true, real life, real time, operational synonym, is organizations are operationally synonymous with their laws. You cannot have organizations, institutions without men. You cannot have organizations, institutions without rules. When I say laws, I'm not now running out of time even making any great distinction. You call it anything you want to, but there has to be known, stated laws, rules, guidelines. There's more than guidelines. They must be abided by. There may be some that they consider. They may state that some of these are optional, some of these suggestions. But there must be rules stated, predictable, understood, or the organization will collapse. The leaf will collapse. The Hot Spit, North Dakota Literary Society cannot exist, even with 5 or 6 members. It will not exist unless there are a few laws, such as we meet at 7 o'clock on every 3rd Wednesday. Now, if the 6 people, or some majority of them, I didn't major in math, so I don't know how to express a majority of 6, so ask your congressman. If it is not taken seriously, then the organization cannot survive. They at least got to have that. That the people at least got to show up. And of course, I thought you weren't going to say that anymore. The larger the organization, the church, a religion, an art museum, a local government, a national government, there must be laws, rules, and they've got to be stated, they have got to be standard, they have got to be predictable. Or the organization, it's just as well we run out of time because there's not much else to say. You've got to see that. And you're overlooking a very pregnant field not to consider off on your own what I'm saying. Don't just look at, well, organizations spawn rules or the organization may need rules. Operationally, they're synonymous. An organization and its rules, and I don't mean specifically one organization's specific rules. It doesn't matter what the hell they are. It doesn't matter whether the organization says we meet every third Wednesday at 7 o'clock or whether we meet 365 days a year at 11:15. It doesn't matter what the rule is. There has to be rules, and they are operationally synonymous with the organization. As we mentioned, you do see that there has to be that same kind of strict, predictable, orderly rules within, consider now man and man's intellect as its own organization. It must be there. The organization would collapse. But now consider how any possible new intellect, new way to actually think, would perforce find any such laws, restrictions, expectations to be the antithesis of its own revolutionary needs. And if you're only listening with old ears, it sounds like that we almost went in a circle. Because if that was happening with an ordinary person, they would be coming apart. Their cells here. The limits, the distinctions, the predictable controls inside the organization of the intellect would be falling the same way as you could destroy the cellular divisions in a leaf and kill it. This would be killing an individual's intelligence. You would be prime fodder for the Menninger Clinic or their minor league team. So I'm not talking about that, of course. I said any possibility of new intelligence in a real revolutionary way would find everything that is necessary for the orderly, stable, predictable operations and growth, which is meaningless in the individual's lifetime. But the growth of this, it would now be the anathema to someone attempting to actually engage in thinking, plain thinking, non-conclusive thinking, as opposed to having some new knowledge. Because knowledge, if anything, is what? Organized. And revolutionary thinking, oh, I don't know. What can I tell you when we got 20 seconds left? Well, how about this? It's not perfect, but give me a break. 15 seconds. As opposed to orderly knowledge, just as opposed to, if we consider orderly knowledge, as much as I love the man, and he thought very highly of me, Monsieur Bach or Mozart, as opposed to that being knowledge, perhaps go home and take an Ornette Coleman record back from the 50s, and if you can do it with your turntable, play it backwards. Not a perfect allegory, not a perfect comparison, but I think for the price, it's only $19.95 by credit card, I don't think you can complain.